My wife says that conversation never happened. That's the sentence that has been echoing in my head for months. Not, I don't remember exactly what I said. Not, I was tired. Just a calm, almost annoyed, that conversation never happened. The problem is that it happened yesterday. I know because I remember every single word. I even remember the coffee mug she was holding, the blue sweater she always wears on rainy mornings, and the way she kept looking at the kitchen window instead of at me. Until then, my life had been painfully ordinary. Married for over a decade, one teenage daughter, a mortgage that seemed determined to outlive both of us, and two jobs between us to keep everything running. We weren't the kind of couple people envied, but we were solid. At least I thought we were. Arguments happened, bills piled up, and romance slowly became grocery lists and reminding each other to buy toothpaste. Still, I trusted her without thinking about it. Looking back, maybe that's the first mistake I made. Not trusting her. Trusting our routine more than the person living inside it. If someone had asked me 6 months earlier whether anything felt wrong in our marriage, I would have laughed. She still kissed me goodbye before work. We still watched television together every Friday night. She still called to ask if we needed milk on her way home. Nothing dramatic. Nothing suspicious. But normal can hide a lot. Tiny things started changing long before I noticed them. She began repeating questions she had already asked. What time is Emma's dentist appointment? I'd answer. 10 minutes later she'd ask again. I blamed stress. She blamed menopause. Life moved on. Then came the forgotten conversations. Nothing important at first. She'd promised to pay a bill and later insist I'd never mentioned it. She forgot we'd agreed to visit my parents. Forgot ordering something online. Forgot inviting friends over for dinner. We joked about getting old. She even laughed louder than I did. I wanted to believe those laughs were genuine. Because the alternative, that something much bigger was happening right in front of me, never even crossed my mind. The conversation she later claimed had never happened started like any other Tuesday evening. She was chopping vegetables while I was loading the dishwasher. The television was on in the living room, but neither of us was paying attention. Out of nowhere she asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd married different people?" I laughed because it sounded like one of those pointless late-night questions. Then she stopped cutting, leaned against the counter, and quietly said, "Sometimes I think I already did." I remember asking what she meant. She looked directly at me and said, "There are things about my past you don't know. Things that could change how you see me." I waited for her to continue, expecting something harmless, a hidden debt, an old relationship, anything ordinary. Instead she whispered, "I don't think I'm the same person I was when we got married." Before I could ask another question, our daughter walked into the kitchen asking about homework. The moment disappeared. The next morning my wife looked at me like none of it had ever happened. I couldn't let it go. The entire drive to work, I replayed her words over and over, trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood them. Maybe she meant she'd changed emotionally. Maybe she was talking about getting older. People say strange things when they're tired. That evening I brought it up as casually as I could. "About what you said yesterday, are you okay?" She frowned. "What are you talking about?" "In the kitchen. You said there were things from your past I didn't know." She stared at me for several seconds before giving a confused little laugh. "No, I didn't." I smiled because I honestly thought she was joking. "Come on. We were making dinner." "I never said that." The smile disappeared from my face. I reminded her about the blue sweater, the vegetables, our daughter interrupting us. I repeated entire sentences she had spoken almost word for word. She shook her head after every detail. "I think you dreamed it." The certainty in her voice unsettled me more than if she'd simply denied the meaning of the conversation. She genuinely looked convinced it had never happened, and for the first time, I questioned my own memory. For the next few days, I became obsessed with proving to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. I started writing things down after every meaningful conversation. Nothing dramatic, just dates, times, and a few sentences about what we discussed. It felt ridiculous, like I was collecting evidence against my own wife, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Then it happened again. She came into my home office while I was answering emails and sat on the edge of the desk. "We should probably sell the lake cabin," she said quietly. "Keeping it doesn't make sense anymore." The cabin had belonged to my late father. Selling it had never even been a topic between us. We talked for nearly 20 minutes. She explained that maintaining it was becoming expensive and that maybe it was time to let go of the past. I didn't agree, but we spoke calmly. The following evening I mentioned calling a realtor just to see what the property was worth. She blinked. "What realtor?" "You brought it up yesterday." "I haven't talked about the cabin in months." Her expression wasn't defensive. It was confused. That frightened me far more than another argument ever could. By then I stopped wondering whether I was imagining things and started paying attention to everything around her. She guarded her phone more carefully than she ever had before. It wasn't obvious enough to scream affair, but it was different. She used to leave it on the kitchen counter or toss it onto the couch. Now it was always in her pocket or turned face down beside her. One Saturday morning she jumped into the shower, leaving it on the dining table for the first time in weeks. I wasn't planning to touch it. Then it lit up. The preview showed only one sentence. "Did you remember our conversation this time?" My stomach dropped. The sender's name wasn't saved, just a phone number. Before I could think, I unlocked the screen using the code I'd known for years. The message thread was almost empty. Just that one text. No history. No replies. It looked as if every previous message had been deleted. When she walked back into the room, drying her hair with a towel, I asked as calmly as I could, "Who's been asking whether you remembered a conversation?" The color drained from her face before she said a single word. She froze for just a second, but it was enough. People always say guilt looks obvious. It doesn't. Sometimes it looks like someone trying too hard to appear normal. She took the phone from my hand and looked at the screen as if she'd never seen the message before. "I don't know who that is," she said. "You don't know, or you don't remember?" The question slipped out before I could stop myself. She flinched. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means this isn't the first time you've forgotten a conversation." She rubbed her temples and sighed. "I've been under a lot of stress." Stress doesn't explain deleted messages. They weren't deleted. They're gone. I don't know why. Every answer created two more questions. I asked her to call the number. She refused immediately. I asked why. She said she didn't want to encourage a scammer. Nothing about it made sense. Then, almost under her breath, she whispered something I barely heard. "What if they're right?" I looked at her. "Who's right?" She covered her mouth as though she'd said something she hadn't meant to say. And once again, she insisted she couldn't remember saying it. I called the number the next afternoon while sitting alone in my car outside the office. I expected it to go to voicemail. Instead, a man answered on the second ring. He didn't sound nervous or angry. He sounded tired. When I asked who he was, there was a long silence before he quietly said, "You're her husband, aren't you?" Every muscle in my body tightened. "How do you know that?" "Because she told me about you." I felt sick. I asked the question I had been dreading since I saw that message. "Are you having an affair with my wife?" He sighed. "No." The answer should have relieved me. Instead, it made everything stranger. He told me they had known each other for years but barely spoke anymore. Then he asked something that caught me completely off guard. "Did she tell you she visited me yesterday?" I said yes. At least, I thought she had. He laughed without humor. "She wasn't here yesterday." Another pause. The visit you're remembering happened almost 3 months ago. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. Someone was lying. I just had no idea which one of them it was. I asked him not to hang up. My voice was shaking, and I hated that he could probably hear it. If you're not sleeping with my wife, then tell me who you are. Another long silence followed. Finally, he said, my name is Daniel. We dated before she met you. That didn't surprise me. Everyone has a past. What came next did. She contacted me again about a year ago. For what? She wanted to apologize. I frowned. For ending things? No. He took a slow breath. For lying. The word hit me like a punch. I asked what she had lied about. I thought she had already told you. Told me what? He hesitated so long that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, she told me she was pregnant back then. I couldn't speak. She said the baby was mine. I felt the air leave my lungs. Daniel continued before I could interrupt. Months later she admitted she wasn't even sure who the father was. Then she disappeared. I whispered the only question that mattered. How old would that child be now? His answer matched my daughter's age exactly. I don't remember driving home. One moment I was sitting in the parking lot with my phone pressed against my ear, and the next I was standing in my own kitchen, staring at the family photos covering the refrigerator. There was my daughter at 5, missing her front teeth. At 10, holding a soccer trophy. Last Christmas, laughing with frosting on her nose after helping bake cookies. I looked at every picture and searched for something I had never questioned before. Did she have my eyes? My smile? My father's chin? The guilt hit me almost immediately. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was still the same kid who hugged me every morning before school and called me when she needed advice. Nothing about her had changed. Only my certainty had. When my wife came home, she knew something was different the second she saw my face. She quietly set her keys on the counter. What happened? I looked straight at her. I spoke to Daniel. The color disappeared from her face. This time she didn't pretend she didn't know the name. Instead, she whispered, almost to herself, I hoped he'd never answer your call. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence felt heavier than any shouting match we'd ever had. She stood by the kitchen island with both hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles turned white. I stayed near the doorway because I wasn't sure I trusted myself to get any closer. Finally, she looked up. I never wanted you to find out like this. My heart sank. So it's true? Tears filled her eyes before she answered. I really was pregnant when I was with Daniel. I felt as though the floor had shifted beneath me. And our daughter? She closed her eyes. I don't know. Those 3 words broke something inside me. You don't know? I found out I was pregnant after we had already broken up. Then I met you. The dates were so close that I convinced myself the baby had to be yours. You convinced yourself? She started crying. I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. I shook my head. No. You needed me to believe it. She didn't argue. She just kept crying, and somehow that hurt even more than if she had screamed back. The next few days were a blur of conversations I never imagined having. We barely slept. Every night ended with one of us crying, the other staring at the ceiling, or both of us sitting in complete silence because there were no words left. I asked the same questions repeatedly. Did you ever take a DNA test? No. Did Daniel ever ask for one? He wanted to, years ago. So why didn't you? She buried her face in her hands. Because I was terrified of the answer. That confession made me angrier than anything else. She hadn't hidden the truth for a week or a month. She had hidden it for our daughter's entire life. Every birthday party. Every school play. Every Father's Day card she helped our daughter make. All of those memories suddenly felt wrapped around a secret only she knew. I couldn't even decide what hurt more. The possibility that my daughter wasn't biologically mine, or the certainty that my wife had looked me in the eye for years, carrying a question she never allowed me to ask. The hardest part wasn't looking at my wife. It was looking at my daughter and pretending everything was normal. She noticed the distance almost immediately. One evening she asked why I had been sleeping in the guest room. I told her I had been working late and didn't want to wake her mother. It was a pathetic excuse, and I think she knew it. She kept watching both of us during dinner, as if she were waiting for someone to finally tell the truth. My wife begged me not to involve her. "Please," she whispered. "She's just a child." I almost laughed. "No. She's old enough to notice her parents falling apart." Then came another blow. My wife admitted she had started forgetting conversations months earlier, but she had hidden that from me too. She said sometimes entire days felt blurred together, and she couldn't separate recent memories from older ones. For the first time since all of this began, I wondered if two disasters had been happening at once. One was the lie she'd carried for years. The other was whatever was happening inside her mind, and neither of us knew how much worse it might become. She finally agreed to see a neurologist. Part of me wanted the doctor to tell us nothing was wrong, that stress had simply overwhelmed her. Another part dreaded hearing that there really was a medical reason she couldn't remember conversations we'd had only hours earlier. The tests took weeks. Those weeks felt endless. At the same time, I scheduled a DNA test. I hated myself for doing it, but I hated myself even more for hesitating. Every time I looked at my daughter, I reminded myself that the test wasn't about how much I loved her. It was about finally putting one question to rest after years of living inside someone else's secret. My wife didn't argue. She signed every form without looking at me. "I know I've lost the right to ask for trust," she said quietly. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it fixed anything. Because it was the first time she had stopped making excuses. She wasn't blaming stress. She wasn't blaming fear. She wasn't claiming she couldn't remember. She simply accepted that some damage couldn't be undone, no matter what the results eventually revealed. The DNA results arrived before the neurologist's final report. I opened the envelope alone because neither of us had the courage to do it together. I was her biological father. I read the sentence 3 times before it finally sank in. The relief was so overwhelming that I started crying, but the tears didn't erase everything that had happened. They couldn't give us back the years we'd spent living with a secret that never needed to exist. A week later, the neurologist confirmed that my wife's memory problems were real. The cause wasn't something simple or temporary, and treatment could only slow the progression, not erase what had already begun. In a cruel way, the two truths collided. She had spent years hiding a lie, and now her own mind was beginning to hide pieces of her life from her. We're still married. Some days feel almost normal. Other days she asks me the same question twice, or insists we've never had a conversation I remember clearly. I don't know what our future looks like anymore. I only know that trust can be broken by betrayal, and grief can arrive long before the person you love is actually gone.